Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of resilience, growth, and transformation. Today, we follow the journey of Madison Carter, a young woman who seemed to have it all, a life of luxury and glamour in Los Angeles. But beneath the surface, she was searching for meaning and connection. Through heartbreak, betrayal, and a powerful legacy left by her late mother, Madison discovers her true purpose, creating a foundation to support women facing mental health challenges. Join us as we explore her path to self-discovery and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story. My name is Madison Carter, and I suppose, from the outside, my life looked perfect. At 22, I was living in Los Angeles, a city that thrives on the glitz and glamour I had always known. My days were a whirlwind of designer shopping sprees, exclusive events, and glittering parties with people who smiled wide but never seemed to look you in the eye. I wore couture, sipped champagne, and posed for photos that would make anyone believe I was utterly happy. But deep inside, there was a hollowness, a gnawing void that no amount of luxury could fill. Growing up, I was the golden girl in every sense. My father, David Carter, built his empire from the ground up, and his success translated into every imaginable comfort for me. My mother, Elizabeth, had been a quiet but graceful presence in my childhood, though I never truly understood her. She passed away when I was a teenager, and her absence left a wound that was covered up with distractions. My father made sure I wanted for nothing except, perhaps, a sense of purpose. Los Angeles was my playground. My friends, or at least the people I called friends, were as polished and privileged as I was. There was Chloe Simmons, my closest confidant, or so I thought. We spent hours together, indulging in the frivolities that defined our lives, shopping for the latest trends, jetting off to Aspen or Miami on a whim, and basking in the glow of our seemingly perfect existence. But beneath the surface, our bond was as shallow as the glossy veneers we presented to the world. The emptiness I felt was something I could never admit. Not even to Chloe. It crept in during the quiet moments when I was alone in my sprawling penthouse, staring out at the city lights. I would tell myself it was just fatigue or boredom. But deep down, I knew it was something more, a yearning for something real, something meaningful. One evening, at a gala that sparkled with diamonds and ambition, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored walls of the venue. My reflection stared back at me, flawless and composed, but I felt like an imposter. The laughter around me felt hollow, the conversations meaningless. Chloe was at my side, radiating charm as always, and I couldn't help but wonder if she felt it too. Was she also haunted by the same gnawing emptiness? Or was I the only one trapped in this gilded cage? I didn't have much time to dwell on it, though. My life was a series of carefully planned distractions, and I was too busy living up to the image everyone expected of me. It wasn't until the betrayal that my carefully constructed world began to crumble. It started subtly, with little things that I brushed off as coincidences. A misplaced credit card statement, a strange withdrawal I couldn't recall making. Chloe was always quick to soothe my worries, brushing them aside with her usual charm. "Don't stress, Maddie," she'd say, flashing that reassuring smile. "You probably just forgot. You're always so busy." And I believed her because I wanted to. Chloe was my anchor in a world where trust was a rare commodity. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. It was a call from my father's financial advisor that finally pulled back the curtain. He had noticed irregularities in my accounts, large sums disappearing without explanation. At first, I was in denial. It had to be a mistake, some clerical error. But as the evidence piled up, the reality became impossible to ignore. Someone close to me was siphoning my money, and all the clues pointed to Chloe. The confrontation was a moment of clarity I'll never forget. I invited Chloe over. desperate to understand how someone I considered my closest friend could betray me. She arrived, radiant as always, completely unaware of what awaited her. I laid out the evidence, my voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. At first, she denied it, laughing nervously as though it were all some grand misunderstanding. But as I pressed her facade began to crack. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Maddie," she finally admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I was desperate. You have so much. And I was drowning." Her confession was a mix of remorse and self-pity. And while part of me wanted to believe her, I couldn't ignore the sting of her betrayal. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust. About the lie that had been our friendship. In the days that followed, the emptiness I had always felt seemed to expand, consuming everything in its path. I realized how fragile my world was, built on appearances and alliances that could crumble in an instant. I began to question everything: my friendships, my choices, even my sense of self. Who was I without the glitz and glamour? What did I truly have, apart from wealth and status? My father, ever the pragmatist, offered a solution that seemed radical at the time. "Come to the ranch," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You need a change of pace, Madison. A chance to clear your head." The ranch in Jackson, Wyoming, had been in our family for generations. Though I had only visited a handful of times, it was a stark contrast to the life I knew: quiet, rugged, and unpretentious. The thought of leaving Los Angeles, of stepping away from the chaos and distractions, terrified me. But deep down, I knew he was right. And so, I packed my bags and left behind the city that had been my sanctuary and my prison. As the plane touched down in Jackson, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. The sprawling landscape, with its rolling hills and endless skies, was both beautiful and intimidating. It was a world away from the concrete and neon lights I was used to, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever feel at home here. As I stepped onto the ranch, the crisp air filling my lungs, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this place would help me find the answers I was searching for. The journey was just beginning, and though I was far from understanding what I was looking for, I knew I couldn't go back. My life in Los Angeles felt like a distant memory, a chapter that had closed. Here, on this ranch, I would have to face the truth about who I was and who I wanted to become. The stillness of the ranch was a shock to my system. Gone were the constant hum of traffic and the chatter of people filling the background of my days. Here, in Jackson, Wyoming, there was only the sound of the wind sweeping through the fields and the occasional neigh of a horse. It was unnerving at first. The silence had a way of making you confront your own thoughts, stripping away the distractions that once shielded me from myself. My father, David, met me at the ranch gate with the calm assurance of someone who had always been grounded in this place. He wasn't the same man I knew in Los Angeles, where he was the unshakable CEO of Carter Enterprises. Here, he seemed softer, more approachable. "Welcome home, Maddie," he said, pulling me into a warm hug. The word home felt foreign in this context. This wasn't home. It was a distant corner of my life I had barely acknowledged. The ranch was sprawling, with weathered barns, endless fields, and the backdrop of the Teton Mountains standing like sentinels. It was beautiful in a raw, unpolished way. I had forgotten how vast and open the world could feel. My father walked me to the main house, a cozy structure with creaking wooden floors and the scent of aged leather. It was nothing like my penthouse in Los Angeles, but there was something comforting about its simplicity. Adjusting to life on the ranch was harder than I expected. For someone used to luxury, even the most basic tasks felt like monumental challenges. The first morning, I struggled to figure out how to work the old coffee maker in the kitchen. By the time I managed to brew a cup, My father was already outside, overseeing the ranch staff. "Early bird gets the worm," he said when I finally joined him. I smiled weakly, feeling more like a fish out of water than ever. My father had assigned one of the ranch hands, Clara, to show me the ropes. Clara was in her early 30s, with a sun-weathered face and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't seem particularly impressed by me, and I couldn't blame her. "You'll get used to it," she said as she handed me a pair of work gloves and led me to the stables. I had never mucked out a stall in my life, and the experience was as unpleasant as I had imagined. But there was a strange satisfaction in the physical labor, a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. The ranch staff was kind but distant at first. They weren't sure what to make of me, and I wasn't sure what to make of them. But as the days passed, I began to notice the small ways they showed their kindness. Clara would leave a cup of coffee on the porch for me before heading to the fields. Marcus, another ranch hand, patiently taught me how to saddle a horse without making me feel like an idiot. Slowly, I started to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. But even as I settled into the rhythm of ranch life, I couldn't escape the betrayal that had brought me here. At night, when the ranch was quiet and the stars were impossibly bright, I would replay my confrontation with Chloe in my mind. Her words haunted me. I was desperate. Desperate for what? Money? Power? Did she envy my life so much that she was willing to destroy our friendship for it? Or was there something deeper I didn't understand? The betrayal forced me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about my relationships. Chloe had been my closest friend, the one person I believed I could trust. If she could betray me so easily, what did that say about the other people in my life? I began to see the cracks in the foundation of my social circle. So many of my friendships were built on convenience, on shared interests that were as superficial as the parties we attended. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. One afternoon, as I was helping Clara mend a fence, I broke down. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the emptiness, the uncertainty, finally caught up to me. Clara didn't say much, but she put a comforting hand on my shoulder and let me cry. "Sometimes, you've got to let it out," she said simply. Her words stayed with me. They were a reminder that it was okay to feel, to grieve the loss of the life I thought I had. My father, too, noticed the change in me. He didn't push me to talk about it, but his quiet presence was a source of comfort. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You're stronger than you think, Maddie. This place has a way of teaching you that." I didn't know if he was right, but I wanted to believe him. As the weeks passed, the ranch began to feel less like a punishment and more like a sanctuary. It was a place where I could strip away the layers of my old life and start to figure out who I really was. The betrayal had shattered my world. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the beginning of something new. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of hope. I wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but I knew one thing: I was ready to find out. Life on the ranch had its way of stripping everything down to its core. Out here, surrounded by rolling fields and the quiet hum of nature, there was no place for pretense. The things that once defined me, the clothes, the parties, the social status, meant nothing. It was an exile of sorts, but one that I was beginning to realize I desperately needed. At first, I resisted everything about it. The early mornings, the manual labor, the constant smell of hay and horses, it was all so foreign, so uncomfortable. My days began before the sun rose, with Clara pounding on my door like a drill sergeant. "Time to move. City girl," she'd say, her tone somewhere between teasing and exasperation. Begrudgingly, I'd drag myself out of bed and into the cool morning air, where the ranch hands were already hard at work. The tasks they assigned me were humbling, to say the least. Cleaning stalls, hauling feed, repairing fences, each chore was a reminder of how sheltered my life had been. My hands, once manicured to perfection, were now calloused and sore. My hair, usually styled meticulously, was perpetually tied back in a messy ponytail. There were no mirrors here to reflect my discomfort. Only the quiet judgment of the ranch animals who seemed unimpressed by my efforts. And yet, there was something oddly satisfying about it all. The physicality of the work forced me out of my own head, grounding me in the present moment. There was no time to dwell on Chloe's betrayal or the emptiness that had plagued me in Los Angeles. Out here, it was just me, the task at hand, and the vast expanse of the Wyoming landscape. The people on the ranch played a significant role in my adjustment. Clara, despite her tough exterior, was a patient teacher. She had a dry sense of humor that kept me from taking myself too seriously. "You're not half bad with a shovel," she said one day, smirking as I wiped sweat from my brow. It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd received from her, and I took it as a small victory. Then there was Marcus, a man of few words but endless kindness. He taught me how to ride a horse, a skill I had always romanticized but never attempted. My first ride was a disaster. I could barely keep my balance. And the horse, a stubborn gelding named Duke, seemed determined to test my patience. Marcus watched my struggles with quiet amusement before stepping in to guide me. "It's about trust," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The horse needs to know you're in control, but you've also got to trust him to carry you." His words stuck with me, resonating far beyond the realm of horseback riding. Despite their kindness, there was still a sense of distance between me and the ranch staff. I couldn't blame them. To them, I was an outsider, a city girl playing at country life. I wondered if they saw me as fragile, someone who would crumble at the first sign of real hardship. In truth, they weren't entirely wrong, but the more time I spent here, the more determined I became to prove myself not to them, but to myself. My father was a steady presence throughout it all, though he mostly stayed in the background. He seemed to know that I needed space to figure things out on my own. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch together, watching the sky shift from blue to pink to deep indigo. Those quiet moments with him were some of the most profound. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words carried weight. "Your mother used to love this time of day," he said one evening, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "She said it made her feel connected to something bigger." My mother. Her absence was a shadow that loomed over everything. But here on the ranch, it felt more tangible. I found myself thinking about her more often, piecing together memories that had grown hazy over the years. She had always been a quiet force in my life, her love steady but understated. As a child, I hadn't understood her melancholy, the moments when she seemed distant despite being physically present. Now, I was beginning to see those moments for what they were: a struggle, a battle she fought silently to protect me from her pain. One day, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I came across a journal with her handwriting scrawled across the cover. My breath caught as I opened it, the pages filled with her thoughts and dreams. It was here that I discovered something I had never known: my mother had felt out of place on the ranch, just as I did now. She wrote about her struggles to adapt, her longing for the life she had left behind, and the sacrifices she made for our family. But amidst the struggles, there were also dreams. She had written about wanting to create a foundation for women dealing with the same challenges she faced, a safe space for those battling depression and feeling isolated. It was a dream she never had the chance to fulfill, and reading her words felt like a call to action. For the first time, I felt a connection to her that transcended the years and the loss. Her pain, her dreams, her love, they were all part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was. The ranch was beginning to change me, in ways I couldn't fully articulate yet. It was stripping away the layers of my old life, exposing the raw, unvarnished truth of who I was. And in that process, I was starting to see the outlines of who I could become. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer running from it. Here, in this quiet, unassuming place, I was beginning to find the courage to face it head-on. As the days on the ranch turned into weeks, I began to notice a shift within myself. The once unbearable silence no longer felt so daunting. Instead, it became a kind of companion, allowing me to explore parts of my mind and heart I had long ignored. Among the discoveries was a growing curiosity about my mother, Elizabeth Carter. Her memory had always been a quiet presence in my life. But here on the ranch, where she had spent much of her own time, she began to feel closer than ever. It started with the journal I found in the attic, its pages filled with her thoughts and reflections. I couldn't stop reading it, even when the words made my chest ache. Through her writing, I glimpsed a side of her I had never truly known, a woman who was both strong and vulnerable, loving yet deeply conflicted. She wrote about the struggles of adapting to life on the ranch, about feeling isolated and out of place. She had grown up in the city, like me, and leaving that world behind had been a sacrifice she made for my father and, ultimately, for me. One entry, in particular, stood out. She described sitting on the very porch where I now spent my evenings, watching the same sunsets I had come to cherish. "This place humbles you," she had written. "It strips away the noise and forces you to confront yourself. Some days, I hate it for that. But other days, I think it's exactly what I need." Her words mirrored my own feelings, and I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to her. It was as though, across time and space, she was reaching out to guide me. My curiosity about her grew with each passing day. I began to ask questions, starting with Clara. What was she like here? I asked one afternoon, as we brushed down the horses together. Clara paused, her brush still in hand, and gave me a thoughtful look. "Your mom was complicated," she said carefully. "She had this warmth about her, but you could tell she carried a lot on her shoulders. She loved you and your dad fiercely, but I think being here was hard for her. She missed the city, the life she knew before." I nodded, her words aligning with what I had read in the journal. "Did she ever talk about it?" I pressed. "Not much," Clara admitted. "She kept most of it to herself. But there were moments when she'd open up, usually when she was working in the garden. She said it helped her think." Clara gestured toward a small plot of land near the barn, overgrown with weeds. That was her space. Later that day, I found myself standing in the garden, imagining my mother there, her hands in the soil, finding solace in the act of creation. The garden had fallen into neglect since her passing, but I felt an urge to revive it. It was a small way to connect with her, to honor her memory. With Clara's help, I began clearing the weeds and planting new seeds. The process both cathartic and symbolic. My conversations about my mother didn't stop with Clara. One evening, as my father and I sat on the porch, I finally gathered the courage to ask him the questions that had been weighing on my mind. "Why didn't you ever tell me how much she struggled?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. He sighed deeply, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I thought I was protecting you," he said after a long pause. "You were so young when she passed. And I didn't want you to carry the burden of her pain. She didn't want that for you either. But I could have understood," I said, my throat tightening. "Maybe I would have felt closer to her if I'd known." He turned to look at me then, his expression filled with regret. "You're right," he admitted. "I should have told you. She was an incredible woman. Maddie. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. But she had her demons. Depression isn't something you can just will away, no matter how much love you have for the people around you." His words hit me like a wave, both heartbreaking and illuminating. My mother's struggle wasn't a reflection of weakness but of her humanity. It made me see her in a new light, as someone who had fought hard to balance her own pain with her love for our family. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking more about her dream of starting a foundation for women dealing with similar challenges. It was a side of her I had never known, a vision she had kept to herself. Perhaps because she never believed she'd have the chance to see it realized. The idea of picking up where she left off began to take root in my mind, though I wasn't yet sure what it would look like. As I worked in the garden, planting the seeds that would eventually bloom into something beautiful, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My mother's presence was everywhere, in the soil beneath my hands, in the sunset that painted the sky each evening, and in the journal that now sat on my bedside table, its pages worn from my constant reading. She had been gone for years. But here on the ranch, she was with me more than ever. Through her words and the memories of those who knew her, I was beginning to understand her not just as my mother but as a woman with her own struggles, dreams, and complexities. And in doing so, I was starting to understand myself. My time on the ranch was changing me in ways I hadn't anticipated, peeling back the layers of who I thought I was and revealing something deeper, something truer. For the first time, I felt like I was on the brink of discovering not just who she had been, but who I could become. The more I learned about my mother, the more questions I had. Each new piece of information felt like a fragment of a puzzle I was desperately trying to put together. I wanted to understand her, to know the woman behind the quiet smiles and the love she had so selflessly given me. But for every answer I uncovered, more questions arose. And I knew that only one person could give me the clarity I sought: my father. David Carter was a man of few words, especially when it came to my mother. For as long as I could remember, he had spoken about her with a kind of reverence, but always in generalities. She was the love of my life, he'd say. Or she had a heart of gold. I believed him. But those statements only scratched the surface. Now, with the journal in my possession and the weight of her struggles heavy on my mind, I needed him to go deeper. I needed him to be honest. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the Wyoming horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found him on the porch. He was seated in his usual spot, a mug of coffee in one hand and his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was a peaceful image, but I was about to disrupt it. "Dad," I began hesitantly, taking the chair beside him. "Can we talk about Mom?" He didn't look at me right away, but I saw his shoulders stiffen slightly. "Of course," he said, his voice calm but guarded. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, clutching the journal I had brought with me. "I've been reading this," I said, placing it on the table between us. His eyes flicked to it, and I saw a flicker of recognition. "It's her journal. I found it in the attic." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with emotion. "I didn't know that was still here," he admitted. "I thought I'd packed away everything after she." He trailed off, the words too difficult to say. "It's helped me understand her," I said, my voice soft. "But it's also raised a lot of questions. I know she struggled with depression. I know the ranch wasn't easy for her. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me she had dreams she never got to fulfill?" He finally turned to face me, his expression weary but earnest. "Because I thought I was doing what was best for you," he said. "When she passed, you were just a teenager. You were already dealing with so much. And I didn't want to burden you with things you couldn't change. But I could have understood." I pressed, my voice trembling. "I could have known her better. Dad, I feel like I missed out on knowing who she really was." His eyes softened, and he reached out to place a hand on mine. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. Maddie, I truly am. Your mother, she was an incredible woman. But she carried a lot of pain, and she didn't always let people see that. She wanted to protect you from it, just like I did." I looked down at the journal, the pages filled with my mother's innermost thoughts. "She wanted to start a foundation," I said, "to help women who were struggling, like she was. Did you know about that?" He nodded slowly. "She talked about it sometimes," he said, "especially in the early years. She wanted to create something meaningful, something that would make a difference. But life got in the way. The ranch, raising you, her own battles, it all took a toll. Why didn't she do it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't think she could, he said, his tone heavy with regret. She was afraid of failing. And I didn't push her. I thought I was supporting her by giving her space. But looking back, maybe I should have encouraged her more. Maybe I should have helped her believe it was possible. His words hung in the air, a poignant reminder of how fear and self-doubt could rob someone of their dreams. My chest tightened with a mix of sadness and determination. I want to do it, I said, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. I want to make her dream a reality. I don't know how yet. But I need to try. He looked at me, his expression a mix of surprise and pride. Are you sure? He asked. It's a big commitment, Maddie. And it won't be easy. I know, I said, my voice steady. But I can't stop thinking about it. She wanted to help women like her. Women who felt alone and overwhelmed. If I can do something to honor her memory, to carry on her legacy, then I have to try. For the first time in weeks, I saw my father's face light up with something resembling hope. Then I'll help you, he said simply. Whatever you need, I'll be there. In that moment, sitting on the porch with my father as the last rays of sunlight faded into darkness, I felt a sense of purpose unlike anything I had ever known. The path ahead was uncertain, and I had no idea where to begin. But I was no longer afraid. My mother's dream had become my own, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days following my conversation with my father were a blur of thought and emotion. I couldn't stop thinking about my mother's dream of starting a foundation. It was as if her journal had unlocked something within me, a connection to her that transcended time and loss. I wanted to bring her vision to life. Not just for her but for the women she had hoped to help. Yet, I had no idea where to begin. The ranch, with its steady rhythm of tasks and responsibilities, became my thinking space. I spent hours in the garden, tending to the soil and watching the first sprouts of green push through the earth. The process felt symbolic, a reminder that growth often starts with the smallest of steps. My mother's words echoed in my mind as I worked. This place humbles you. It strips away the noise and forces you to confront yourself. One afternoon, as I sat cross-legged in the garden, my hands caked with dirt, Clara joined me. She didn't say anything at first, just knelt beside me and started pulling weeds. We worked in silence, the quiet companionship comforting. Finally, she broke the stillness. You've been different lately, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Not in a bad way, just more focused. I glanced at her, surprised. I've been thinking a lot about my mom, I admitted. About what she wanted to do but never got the chance to. She had this dream of starting a foundation to help women who were struggling. And I feel like I need to make it happen. Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's a big thing to take on, she said. But if anyone can do it, it's you. Her words bolstered my confidence. Though doubt still lingered, I knew I needed help. Someone who could guide me through the complexities of starting something as monumental as a foundation. That evening, I turned to the one person who had always been my rock. Even when I didn't fully appreciate it, my father. Over dinner, I laid out my thoughts, my hopes, and my fears. I don't know where to start, I admitted, pushing a piece of roasted chicken around my plate. I've never done anything like this before. You don't have to know everything right now, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Starting something like this is a journey. The important thing is that you're passionate about it. The rest, we'll figure out together. He went on to share his insights from years of running his own business, breaking down the steps I would need to take. First, we'll need to define the mission of the foundation, he explained. What exactly do you want to accomplish? What kind of support do you want to provide? I thought about my mother's struggles, about the isolation and fear she must have felt. I want to focus on mental health, I said, helping women who are dealing with depression, anxiety, or other challenges. I want to create a space where they feel seen and supported, where they can get the help they need." He nodded, his expression serious. "That's a noble goal, Maddie. But we'll also need to think about funding, outreach, and building a team. It's not something you can do alone." His words were a reminder of the enormity of the task ahead. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt determined. "I know it's a lot," I said, "but I'm willing to put in the work. This is important to me, Dad. It's important for Mom." In the weeks that followed, we began laying the groundwork for what would become the foundation. My father helped me set up meetings with lawyers, accountants, and non-profit consultants. Each step felt like a small victory, a tangible sign that we were moving closer to making my mother's dream a reality. But the most profound moments came not from the logistics but from the connections I began to build. As word of the foundation spread, women from the local community started reaching out, sharing their stories with me. There was Anne, a young mother who had struggled with postpartum depression, and Maria, a retired teacher who had battled anxiety for years. Their courage in opening up to me was humbling, and their stories reaffirmed the importance of the work I was doing. Through these conversations, I began to see the foundation not just as a tribute to my mother but as a lifeline for countless women who needed support and understanding. It wasn't just about providing resources, it was about creating a community where vulnerability was met with compassion. As the foundation began to take shape, I found myself changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The girl who had once been consumed by parties and designer clothes was gone. In her place was someone who felt grounded, purposeful, and connected to something far bigger than herself. The ranch, which had once felt like a punishment, had become a sanctuary, a place where I had rediscovered not only my mother's legacy but my own strength. One evening, as I stood in the garden, now blooming with vibrant flowers, I felt a deep sense of peace. My mother's dream was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a reality. And in the process, I was discovering my own capacity for love, empathy, and resilience. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the challenges ahead. I was ready to honor my mother's memory, to carry her dream forward, and to make a difference in the lives of others. Here, under the vast Wyoming sky, I felt the kind of fulfillment that no amount of luxury could ever provide. The morning sunlight spilled across the ranch, casting long shadows over the fields as I sat at the dining table, poring over a stack of papers. The reality of what I was undertaking had finally hit me. Starting a foundation wasn't just a matter of heartfelt intentions, it was a maze of legal documents, funding proposals, and logistical challenges. But despite the overwhelming workload, I felt more determined than ever. Each piece of paper, each meeting and phone call, was a step closer to honoring my mother's dream. My father, true to his word, was by my side every step of the way. He had taken on the role of mentor, guiding me through the complexities of launching a non-profit. "The first thing we need to do is establish a mission statement," he said one morning as we sat together in his office. His tone was firm yet patient, a balance he had perfected in years of business leadership. "This will define what the foundation stands for and the impact you want to make." I thought about my mother, about the journal entries that had revealed her struggles and hopes. "The foundation should be a place where women feel supported," I said. "A place where they can access mental health resources, counseling, and community. I want them to know they're not alone." He nodded, jotting down notes. "That's a good start. We'll need to flesh it out. But I like where your head's at." Next came the legal paperwork, a mountain of forms and filings that seemed endless. My father introduced me to Rebecca, a lawyer who specialized in non-profit organizations. She was sharp and efficient, her expertise cutting through the red tape like a hot knife through butter. "You'll need to file for 501 status," she explained during our first meeting. "That will make your foundation tax exempt and allow you to apply for grants and receive donations." Rebecca's words were practical. But they also carried a weight of responsibility. This wasn't just an idea anymore, it was becoming a reality. The paperwork, while tedious, was a necessary part of building something that could stand the test of time. While Rebecca handled the legalities, I turned my attention to the financial side of things. My father had agreed to provide seed funding for the foundation. A generous gesture that I didn't take lightly. "This is an investment in you, Maddie," he said when I expressed my gratitude. "I believe in what you're doing, and I know your mother would be proud." His support meant the world to me. But I also knew the foundation couldn't rely solely on family funds. I needed to find additional sources of income, whether through grants, donations, or partnerships. That's where Sarah Mitchell came in. Sarah was a fundraising consultant my father had worked with in the past, and her enthusiasm for the project was contagious. "I love what you're trying to do," she said during our first call. "Mental health is such an important issue, and there's a real need for organizations like this. I think we can do some incredible work together." Sarah's first suggestion was to host a fundraiser, a chance to introduce the foundation to the community and raise both awareness and money. "It doesn't have to be anything extravagant," she said. "Keep it simple and heartfelt. People connect with authenticity." The idea of organizing an event was daunting, but Sarah's confidence gave me the push I needed. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly to plan the fundraiser. The ranch seemed like the perfect venue, its natural beauty providing a warm and inviting atmosphere. We decided on a picnic-style event, complete with live music, local food vendors, and a short presentation about the foundation's mission. As the date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. What if no one showed up? What if we couldn't raise enough money? But my father and Sarah reassured me at every turn, reminding me that the event was just the beginning. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and the ranch buzzed with activity. Tables were set up under a canopy of trees, adorned with wildflowers and simple linen tablecloths. A local band played soft acoustic melodies, their music drifting through the air as guests began to arrive. I was overwhelmed by the turnout. Friends of my father, members of the community, and even a few of my mother's old friends who had heard about the foundation and wanted to support it. Standing in front of the crowd, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. This was the first time I was speaking publicly about my mother's dream and my own journey to make it a reality. My hands trembled slightly as I held the microphone. But as I looked out at the faces before me, I felt a surge of courage. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "This foundation is more than just a project for me, it's a tribute to my mother, Elizabeth Carter. She was a remarkable woman who faced challenges that many of us can't imagine. Her dream was to create a place where women could find support, understanding, and hope. And today, with your help, we're taking the first steps toward making that dream a reality." The applause that followed was overwhelming, and as I stepped off the makeshift stage, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fundraiser was a success, both financially and emotionally. We raised enough money to cover the foundation's initial expenses. But more importantly, we had built a sense of community around our mission. That night, as I stood in the garden under the blanket of stars, I thought about how far I had come. Just a few months ago, I had been lost, disconnected, and searching for something I couldn't name. Now, I felt a sense of purpose that anchored me in a way I had never experienced before. My mother's dream was no longer just a memory, it was alive, growing, and taking shape before my eyes. And in the process, I was discovering my own capacity for love, empathy, and resilience. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on. The morning after the fundraiser, the ranch felt different. The air seemed lighter, the sun warmer, and the world more alive. Perhaps it was the energy left behind by the event. Or maybe it was the quiet pride I felt in what we had accomplished. For the first time, I woke up not just with a to-do list but with a sense of direction. The foundation was no longer just an idea, it was real. And it was mine. Sitting at the kitchen table with my father, we reviewed the numbers from the fundraiser. You raised more than enough to cover the foundation's startup costs, he said. A smile breaking through his usual composed demeanor. And more importantly, you've built a network of people who believe in your mission. That's the hardest part. I let his words sink in. It felt surreal. Knowing that people had shown up not just out of obligation but because they believed in what I was doing. My mother's dream had resonated with them. And that gave me the strength to move forward. In the days that followed, the work began in earnest. My father and I converted one of the ranch's smaller outbuildings into a makeshift office for the foundation. It wasn't glamorous, just a desk, a few chairs, and a lot of whiteboards, but it was enough. With Sarah's help, I began reaching out to potential partners, drafting proposals, and refining the foundation's mission. Our focus will be on mental health support for women, I explained during one of our meetings. We'll start small, local counseling services, support groups, maybe a few community workshops. But eventually, I'd like to expand to offer resources for women across the state. Maybe even nationwide. Sarah nodded, her enthusiasm matching my own. That's a strong vision, she said. And the fact that it's rooted in your personal story will make people want to support it. You're not just starting a foundation, you're creating a legacy. Legacy. The word lingered in my mind long after the meeting ended. It wasn't just my mother's legacy I was building, it was also my own. For years, I had drifted through life, defined by wealth and privilege but lacking purpose. Now, I was finally stepping into something bigger than myself. As the weeks went by, the foundation began to take shape. We hired a small team, a social worker named Emily, a part-time administrator named Grace, and a volunteer coordinator named Lucas. Each of them brought unique skills and a shared passion for the mission. Emily, in particular, became an invaluable asset. Her experience in mental health advocacy guiding many of our early decisions. The team's first project was a series of free mental health workshops for women in the local community. Emily led the sessions, which covered topics like managing anxiety, recognizing signs of depression, and building resilience. I attended every workshop, not just to oversee them but to learn. Hearing the stories of the women who attended, single mothers, caregivers, students, was both humbling and inspiring. Their struggles reminded me of my mother, and their courage reinforced my commitment to the foundation. But the work wasn't without its challenges. One day, as I was reviewing a grant proposal, Sarah called with some unexpected news. We've hit a snag with one of the donors, she said. They're hesitant about committing funds until they see more concrete results from the foundation. I felt a pang of frustration. We're still in the early stages, I said. How can they expect results when we're just getting started? It's not unusual, Sarah replied. Donors want to know their money is being put to good use. The best thing we can do is focus on making our first projects as impactful as possible. Once we have success stories to share, the funding will follow. Her advice was sound, but it didn't make the pressure any easier to bear. I spent that evening in the garden, my hands buried in the soil as I tried to work through my worries. The flowers we had planted after my mother's journal discovery were in full bloom now, their vibrant colors a testament to the power of patience and care. Looking at them, I realized that building the foundation was no different. It would take time, effort, and a lot of nurturing, but the results would be worth it. The turning point came a few weeks later, during one of our workshops. A woman named Clara, not the ranch hand, but a local schoolteacher, approached me after the session. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she took my hands in hers. I just wanted to thank you, she said. These workshops have made such a difference for me. I've been struggling for years, and I never knew where to turn. But now, I feel like I'm not alone." Her words hit me like a wave, filling me with both gratitude and resolve. This was why I was doing this, for women like Clara, who just needed someone to listen, someone to help them find their strength. As the foundation grew, so did my confidence. I began speaking at events, sharing my mother's story and my own journey. Each time, I felt her presence, as if she were standing beside me, cheering me on. The ranch, once a place of exile, had become a place of transformation. It was no longer just my father's legacy, it was my sanctuary, my starting point, and the heart of the foundation. One evening, as I stood at the edge of the property, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, I felt a deep sense of peace. The work was far from finished, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. My mother's dream had become my own, and in carrying it forward, I was discovering not just who she was, but who I was meant to be. As the foundation began to take its first steps, I found myself transforming alongside it. Each decision, each small victory, and even each setback brought me closer to understanding what it meant to lead with purpose. For years, I had drifted through life, letting others guide my path or distract me with superficial pursuits. But now, I felt the weight of responsibility and, strangely, it didn't feel burdensome. Instead, it was grounding. The workshops were our first success. Emily, our social worker, led them with a warmth and compassion that drew people in. She had a way of making every woman in the room feel seen and valued. And I quickly realized how crucial she was to the Foundation's mission. The women who attended weren't just there for advice or resources, they were there to feel heard. And in those sessions, I saw a glimpse of the community my mother had dreamed of creating, a place where vulnerability was met with empathy and support. One of the moments that stayed with me was during a session on managing anxiety. A woman named Joanne shared her story, her voice trembling as she spoke about the pressures of balancing work, motherhood, and her own mental health. She had been battling panic attacks for years, too ashamed to ask for help. "I thought I had to be perfect," she said, her words heavy with emotion. "I thought admitting I was struggling meant I was failing." Emily responded with the kind of compassion that made me admire her even more. "You're not failing, Joanne," she said gently. "You're human. And asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you brave." That simple exchange was like a light bulb moment for me. My mother's struggles had been hidden away, buried under layers of pride and fear. But here, in this room, women like Joanne were finding the courage to speak their truth. It was a kind of healing, not just for them but for me as well. The work wasn't without its challenges. Running a foundation, even a small one, was more complicated than I had anticipated. I was constantly juggling budgets, outreach efforts, and the logistics of expanding our programs. My father continued to be my rock, offering advice and stepping in when things got overwhelming. But he also encouraged me to make my own decisions, even if they came with risks. "You won't learn if you don't make mistakes," he told me one evening as we reviewed a grant proposal. "Trust your instincts, Maddie. You've got good ones." His faith in me was a lifeline during those moments of doubt. I had spent so much of my life doubting myself, letting others define my worth. But now, I was beginning to see myself through a different lens. I wasn't just David Carter's daughter or the socialite who flitted from party to party. I was someone with a purpose, someone who could make a difference. My transformation didn't go unnoticed. Clara, the ranch hand who had been my toughest critic when I first arrived, surprised me one day with a compliment. "You've come a long way, city girl," she said, handing me a cup of coffee as we worked in the garden. Her tone was teasing, but there was a sincerity in her eyes that warmed me. "You're not afraid to get your hands dirty anymore." "I like that." I smiled, realizing how much her words meant to me. Clara had become more than just a mentor in ranch life, she was a friend. Someone who had seen me at my most vulnerable and stuck around anyway. Her approval felt like a badge of honor. The garden itself had become a symbol of my growth. When I first started working on it, it was overgrown and neglected, much like the parts of my life I had been avoiding. But as the weeks passed, it began to bloom. Flowers of every color sprang to life, their vibrant petals a testament to the care and attention they had been given. Each time I stepped into the garden, I felt a sense of calm and connection to the earth, to my mother, and to myself. One evening, as I tended to the flowers, Emily joined me. She was holding a folder filled with notes from our workshops, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, sitting down beside me, "this foundation is going to change lives. It already has." Her words caught me off guard. "You really think so?" I asked, my voice tinged with doubt. "I don't just think so," she said firmly. "I see it every day. Those women who come to our workshops, they leave with hope. And hope is powerful." Hope. It was a word I hadn't truly understood until recently. For so long, I had lived without it, numb to the emptiness that consumed me. But now, I saw its power not just in the women we were helping but in myself. The foundation wasn't just about fulfilling my mother's dream, it was about building a new future for myself. One rooted in empathy, resilience, and connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in golden light, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the women who had shared their stories, for the team who had rallied around my vision, and for the mother whose dream had inspired it all. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. One step, one seed, and one story at a time. With the foundation's initial momentum, I found myself swept into the day-to-day realities of leadership. It was exhilarating to see the pieces of my mother's dream coming together. But the path forward wasn't as smooth as I had hoped. For every step forward, there seemed to be a challenge waiting just around the corner. I began to realize that building something meaningful was as much about perseverance as it was about passion. One of the first hurdles we encountered was expanding our reach. While the local workshops had been a success, they were limited in scope. I wanted the foundation to serve more women, but scaling up meant tackling logistical and financial obstacles I hadn't fully anticipated. Emily, ever the voice of reason, suggested we partner with existing organizations to share resources and expertise. "It's not about reinventing the wheel," she explained during one of our team meetings. "There are already nonprofits doing amazing work in mental health. If we collaborate with them, we can reach more people without stretching ourselves too thin." Her suggestion made sense, but I found myself grappling with a sense of insecurity. Would partnering with other organizations dilute my mother's vision? Would we lose the personal touch that made our workshops so impactful? These questions weighed heavily on me as I drafted emails and attended networking events, trying to strike the right balance between growth and authenticity. The financial side of things was another ongoing challenge. While the fundraiser had given us a strong start, sustaining the foundation required a steady influx of funding. I spent hours researching grants, reaching out to potential donors, and preparing presentations to pitch our mission. Sarah was instrumental in guiding me through this process, her experience and charisma helping to open doors I couldn't have managed on my own. Still, not every meeting ended with a handshake or a check. Some donors wanted detailed metrics to prove our impact, data I didn't yet have. Others politely declined, citing other commitments or simply a lack of interest. Each rejection stung, a reminder of how much work lay ahead. But with every no, I grew more determined to keep going. My mother's dream deserved more than giving up at the first sign of difficulty. One particularly difficult day, after a potential partnership fell through, I found myself back in the garden. It had become my refuge, a place where I could quiet my mind and refocus. As I knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds and tending to the flowers, Clara approached. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the fence and watched me work. "Looks like you've got a lot on your mind," she said eventually, her voice calm but knowing. I nodded, not looking up. Sometimes it feels like no matter how much I do, it's never enough. Clara let out a soft chuckle. "Welcome to the real world, city girl," she said. "Nothing worth doing comes easy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing." Her words were simple, but they struck a chord. I had spent so much of my life avoiding challenges, retreating into comfort whenever things got hard. But this was different. This was something I cared about deeply, and I realized that the struggles were part of the process. If it were easy, it wouldn't mean as much. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was delegating. In the past, I had always preferred to handle things myself, convinced that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But as the foundation grew, it became clear that I couldn't do everything on my own. Sarah took the lead on fundraising, while Emily focused on program development. Grace, our part-time administrator, kept the office running smoothly, managing schedules and paperwork with an efficiency I envied. Letting go of control was uncomfortable at first, but it also allowed me to focus on the bigger picture. With my team handling the day-to-day tasks, I was able to devote more time to refining our mission and building relationships with the community. I began to see myself not just as the founder of the organization but as its leader, a role that required vision, trust, and resilience. One of the most rewarding moments during this period came during a visit to a local community center where we had launched a pilot program. The program, called Pathways to Strength, offered counseling and support groups for women facing a variety of challenges, from postpartum depression to workplace stress. As I walked through the center, I was struck by the energy and warmth of the space. Women were laughing, sharing stories, and supporting one another in a way that felt almost magical. At the end of the visit, a young woman named Rachel approached me. She was in her mid-20s, with tired eyes but a hopeful smile. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been coming here for a few weeks now, and it's made such a difference. I used to feel so alone, but now I feel like I have a community. I don't know how to explain it, but this place has given me hope." Her words stayed with me long after I left the center. They reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place, not for recognition or accolades, but to make a difference in people's lives. Rachel's gratitude was proof that, despite the challenges, the foundation was already achieving what it set out to do. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself embracing the struggles rather than fearing them. Each obstacle was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to strengthen the foundation for the future. My mother's dream was becoming a reality, one step at a time, and in the process, I was discovering my own strength. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. As the foundation began to gain momentum, I allowed myself a brief moment of pride. The workshops were flourishing, our community outreach was expanding, and donor interest was picking up. For the first time in years, I felt grounded and purposeful. But, as I would soon learn, growth often brings unexpected challenges, and in this case, one that would shake the very core of what we were building. It started with a seemingly innocuous comment from Grace, our administrator. She had noticed some irregularities in our financial records and flagged them during a routine meeting. "It's probably nothing," she said, flipping through her spreadsheets. "But these numbers don't quite add up. I think we should look into it." At first, I didn't think much of it. Mistakes happen, especially when you're juggling multiple accounts and funding streams. I assured Grace we'd get it sorted, but her concern stayed with me. Later that day, I mentioned it to my father, whose experience in business had taught him to take these things seriously. "You need to act on this, Maddie," he said firmly. "Even small discrepancies can be a sign of something bigger. Have the records audited and get to the bottom of it." His words lit a fire under me, and I decided to bring in an external accountant to review our books. Over the next week, they combed through every transaction, every donation, and every expense. What they uncovered left me stunned. The discrepancies weren't accidental. Michael Wright, our financial officer, had been mismanaging funds. At first glance, it seemed like small oversights, expenses labeled incorrectly, invoices that didn't match up. But as the accountant dug deeper, the pattern became clear. Michael had been redirecting money from the foundation into personal accounts. When I confronted him, the weight of betrayal hit me like a freight train. Michael had been one of the first people I brought on board, someone I trusted implicitly. He was a family man, someone who had shared our vision for the foundation. Or so I thought. We sat across from each other in the makeshift office on the ranch, the tension thick in the air. "I don't even know where to start," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this?" He looked down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said quietly. "I was in a tight spot, medical bills, debt, and I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed." His excuses only fueled my anger. "You thought you could steal from an organization meant to help people?" I asked, my voice rising. "From women who are already struggling? How could you justify that?" Michael had no answer, just a mumbled apology that felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation that made sense. But I knew none would. The damage had been done, and the trust one had placed in him was shattered. After consulting with my father and the accountant, I made the difficult decision to demand Michael's resignation. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the integrity of the foundation. I couldn't risk keeping someone who had violated that trust. The fallout was messy. There were legal proceedings to navigate, donors to reassure, and a team that was understandably shaken. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. I spent countless hours on damage control, drafting statements, meeting with donors, and implementing stricter financial safeguards. Emily and Sarah were my lifelines during this time, their unwavering support reminding me that I wasn't alone. "This isn't the end," Emily said one evening as we sat in the garden. She had brought over a bottle of wine, insisting we take a moment to breathe. "It's a setback, sure, but it doesn't erase everything you've built. You're stronger than this, Maddie. The foundation is stronger than this." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. I realized that while Michael's betrayal had been a blow, it didn't define us. What mattered was how we responded, how we learned from the experience and emerged stronger. With that in mind, I threw myself into rebuilding. We brought in a new financial officer, someone thoroughly vetted and with a reputation for integrity. Grace worked with the accountant to overhaul our financial systems, creating a transparent framework that ensured every dollar was accounted for. I reached out to our donors personally, explaining what had happened and the steps we were taking to prevent it from happening again. Most of them responded with understanding and even admiration for our transparency. The crisis, though painful, taught me invaluable lessons about leadership and resilience. I realized that trust, while essential, had to be earned and safeguarded. I also learned the importance of surrounding myself with people who shared my values and were willing to hold me and each other accountable. One evening, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I found myself thinking about my mother. Her journal entries spoke of fear and doubt, of feeling overwhelmed by the weight of her dreams. I understood those feelings now more than ever. But I also understood her strength, the quiet determination that kept her moving forward even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The foundation had weathered its first major storm, and though it had left scars, it hadn't broken us. If anything, it had made us more resilient, more committed to our mission. And as I stood in the garden that night, looking up at the stars, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fulfilling my mother's dream anymore. It was about building something that could withstand anything, something that could truly make a difference in the world. The journey was far from over. But I was ready for whatever came next. Betrayal had taught me to be vigilant. But it had also reminded me of the importance of trust, community, and the unshakable belief that even in the face of adversity, we could rise stronger. After the storm of Michael's betrayal, the foundation stood on unsteady ground. While the financial discrepancies had been addressed, the emotional fallout lingered. Trust among our team, with our donors, and even within myself, felt fragile, like a delicate thread stretched too thin. Rebuilding that trust became my top priority, and in doing so, I learned that recovery was about more than just fixing what was broken. It was about proving that we could grow stronger in the process. The first step was addressing the team. Emily, Sarah, Grace, and I met one evening in the small office at the ranch. The atmosphere was tense, we all felt the weight of what had happened. "I won't sugarcoat this," I said, looking around the room. "What Michael did has shaken all of us. But I believe in this foundation. And I believe in all of you. We've faced a setback. Yes. But this is our chance to show everyone, including ourselves, that we're resilient." Emily, ever the voice of reason, nodded. "We need to focus on transparency," she said. "Not just with donors, but with each other. Let's make sure this never happens again." Her words set the tone for what became a full-scale overhaul of our operations. With Grace's meticulous organization, we implemented a new financial system that included regular audits, detailed reporting, and multiple layers of oversight. Every dollar was tracked, every expenditure reviewed. It was exhausting at times, but it was also empowering. The more we tightened our processes, the more confident we felt in the foundation's integrity. Rebuilding trust with donors was another uphill battle. Many had been understandably shaken by the news of Michael's misconduct, and I knew it was my responsibility to win them back. Over the next few weeks, I made countless phone calls and attended several meetings, often accompanied by Sarah. We explained the situation with honesty and humility, emphasizing the steps we had taken to prevent it from happening again. One particular meeting with a major donor, Mr. Harrison, stood out. He was an older gentleman with a sharp eye and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Why should I continue supporting the foundation?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "What guarantees can you give me that this won't happen again?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I can't promise that we'll never face challenges," I said honestly. "What I can promise is that we've learned from this experience. We've put safeguards in place, and we're committed to transparency at every level. But more than that, I can promise you that this foundation is about more than one person's mistake. It's about the women we're helping, the lives we're changing. That's what we're fighting for." Mr. Harrison studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. "You've got grit, young lady," he said. "I respect that. Let's see what your foundation can do." His words were a turning point for me. They reminded me that leadership wasn't about perfection, it was about perseverance. About showing up even when things felt impossible. Slowly but surely, other donors began to follow suit, renewing their support and reaffirming their faith in the foundation's mission. Meanwhile, our programs continued to grow. Emily launched a new initiative called Safe Circles, a series of peer-led support groups for women in different life stages, mothers, professionals, caregivers, and students. The groups met bi-weekly, offering a safe space for women to share their struggles and celebrate their victories. The response was overwhelming. Attendance skyrocketed, and we began receiving messages from participants about how transformative the experience had been. One woman, Karen, wrote a heartfelt letter that brought me to tears. "I've struggled with postpartum depression for years," she wrote. "I thought I was alone, that no one else could understand what I was going through. But in the Safe Circle group, I found a community of women who not only understood but uplifted me. Your foundation has given me a lifeline. And I can't thank you enough. Karen's letter became a source of inspiration for me during moments of doubt. It was a reminder that, despite the challenges, we were making a real difference. The women we were helping weren't just statistics, they were individuals with stories, struggles, and dreams. And their courage fueled my own. At the same time, I continued to grow as a leader. My father, who had always been my guiding hand, began stepping back, letting me take the reins more fully. You're ready, Maddie, he said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the ranch. This foundation is yours now. You've built it. You've fought for it. And you're the one who will carry it forward. His confidence in me was both humbling and empowering. For so long, I had relied on his guidance, afraid of making mistakes or falling short. But now, I saw those missteps not as failures but as opportunities to learn and grow. Leadership wasn't about having all the answers, it was about being willing to find them. As the weeks turned into months, the foundation found its footing again. The sting of Michael's betrayal began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Our team was stronger, our programs more impactful, and our vision clearer than ever. The crisis had tested us, but it had also brought us closer together, forging bonds that would carry us through whatever lay ahead. One evening, as I walked through the garden, now bursting with vibrant flowers, I felt a deep sense of peace. The foundation had weathered its first major storm, and we had come out stronger on the other side. My mother's dream was alive and thriving, and in carrying it forward, I had found my own. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever challenges came next, knowing that we had the strength and resilience to rise above them. With trust restored and the foundation stabilized, I turned my focus toward the future. While our programs had made a meaningful impact on individual lives, I knew we could do more. The question was how to expand in a way that stayed true to our mission while addressing the needs of the broader community. It was during one of our team meetings that Emily proposed an idea that would take our work in a new direction: prevention and early intervention. Right now, we're helping women who are already in crisis, Emily explained, her voice steady but impassioned. But what if we could prevent those crises from happening in the first place? Imagine offering tools and resources that help women recognize and address mental health issues before they escalate. The room fell silent as her words sank in. Sarah was the first to speak. That's ambitious, she said, nodding thoughtfully. But it makes sense. Prevention could have a ripple effect, not just helping individuals but also strengthening families, workplaces, and communities. I leaned forward, my mind racing with possibilities. What would that look like? I asked. Workshops? Outreach programs? Both, Emily said. We could start with mental health education, teaching women to recognize warning signs in themselves and others. We could also partner with schools, workplaces, and community centers to offer training sessions and resources. The goal would be to create a culture of awareness and support. Her vision was bold, and it ignited something in me. My mother's dream had always been about providing support for women who felt alone and overwhelmed. Expanding into prevention felt like a natural evolution of that mission, a way to reach even more people and create lasting change. Over the next few weeks, our team worked tirelessly to bring Emily's idea to life. We called the initiative Pathways to Wellness, and its focus was threefold: education, outreach, and community building. Emily took the lead on designing the workshops, drawing on her background in social work to create sessions that were both informative and engaging. Sarah used her connections to secure funding and partnerships, while Grace managed the logistics of scheduling and coordinating with local organizations. One of our first outreach efforts was with a local high school. Emily and I visited the school to speak with students about mental health, a topic that was often overlooked in traditional education. Standing in front of a room full of teenagers, I felt a familiar wave of nerves. But their attentiveness quickly put me at ease. We don't talk enough about mental health, I began, my voice steady. But the truth is, it affects all of us in some way. Whether it's stress, anxiety, or feeling overwhelmed. These are things we all experience. And it's okay to ask for help. The students listened intently as Emily led them through activities designed to foster self-awareness and empathy. By the end of the session, several students approached us to share their own experiences. One girl, Ava, thanked us for addressing a topic she had always felt too ashamed to talk about. I didn't realize how many other people felt the same way I do, she said. It's comforting to know I'm not alone. Ava's words stayed with me as we continued to expand the program. Each workshop, each partnership, and each conversation reinforced the importance of what we were doing. Mental health was no longer a taboo subject, it was becoming a topic of open dialogue. A shared responsibility. As pathways to wellness gained momentum, we began to see its impact ripple outward. Women who attended our workshops started sharing what they had learned with their families and friends. Teachers incorporated our materials into their classrooms. And local businesses began inviting us to conduct workplace wellness sessions. The community's response was overwhelming. And it fueled our determination to keep growing. But with growth came new challenges. Expanding our programs stretched our resources thin. And the workload on our team increased significantly. Emily, in particular, bore the brunt of the pressure. Her passion for the initiative was evident. But I could see the exhaustion in her eyes during our meetings. We need to delegate more, Sarah said one evening as we reviewed the program's progress. Emily can't do this alone. And neither can you, Maddie. She was right. While I had learned to trust my team, I still had a tendency to take on too much myself. It was a lesson I was still learning, that leadership wasn't about doing everything, it was about empowering others to share the responsibility. We decided to bring in additional support, hiring a part-time program coordinator to assist Emily and a communications specialist to help with outreach efforts. The new hires brought fresh energy to the team, allowing us to focus on the bigger picture. One of my proudest moments came during a community event where we showcased the impact of pathways to wellness. The event featured testimonials from women who had participated in our programs, along with interactive activities and resources for attendees. As I walked through the crowd, I overheard conversations about mental health that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. Did you know they have resources for postpartum depression? One woman said to another. I wish I'd known about this when I had my first baby. I'm going to sign up for the next workshop, another attendee said. It sounds like something we could all benefit from. Hearing those words filled me with a sense of accomplishment. We were creating change, not just in individual lives but in the community as a whole. My mother's dream was growing beyond anything I had imagined. And I knew she would have been proud. That evening, as I stood under the stars, I thought about how far we had come. The foundation was no longer just a tribute to her, it was a living, breathing force for good. And while the journey was far from over, I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. We were building something lasting, something meaningful. And I was grateful for every step of the way. As the foundation grew, so did the complexities of running it. Pathways to wellness had taken off. And while the success was thrilling, the workload was relentless. I found myself buried in a constant stream of emails, meetings, and decisions, often working late into the night just to stay afloat. Emily, too, was stretched thin, her dedication driving her to take on more than she could realistically handle. It became clear that our current structure wasn't sustainable. One evening, as I sat in the office surrounded by paperwork, Sarah stopped by, her expression serious. Maddie, we need to talk, she said, setting her bag on the desk. This isn't working. You and Emily are doing too much. And it's only a matter of time before something slips through the cracks. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I know, I admitted. But I don't know how to fix it. There's so much to do. And I feel like if I let go of anything, the whole thing will fall apart. Sarah shook her head. That's not how leadership works. You're trying to do everything yourself. And it's not sustainable. You need to delegate more, trust your team, and restructure the workload. Her words stung. But they were true. I had been so focused on keeping the foundation running that I hadn't stopped to consider how my approach might be affecting others or myself. That night, I sat down with my notebook and began brainstorming ways to share the responsibility more effectively. The next morning, I called a meeting with the team to address the issue. I think we need to make some changes, I said, glancing around the room. We've grown a lot in the past few months, and I know the workload has been intense for all of us. I want to make sure we're not just surviving but thriving, both as a team and as individuals. Emily looked relieved, and Grace nodded in agreement. What do you have in mind? Sarah asked, her tone encouraging. I want to create a more balanced leadership structure, I explained. Right now, a lot of the responsibility falls on Emily and me, but that's not fair or sustainable. I think we should establish co-directors for our programs, so Emily isn't carrying the entire load. I also want to bring on a full-time operations manager to oversee the day-to-day logistics. The team listened carefully, and as we discussed the details, I felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about relinquishing control, it was about empowering others to take ownership of their roles. By spreading the responsibilities, we could create a healthier work environment and ensure the foundation's long-term success. Emily's role as co-director was an easy decision. Her passion and expertise had been instrumental in shaping our programs, and I trusted her implicitly. To support her, we hired Laura, an experienced program coordinator who shared our commitment to mental health advocacy. Laura's energy and organizational skills were a perfect complement to Emily's creativity. And together, they began refining our initiatives with renewed focus. For the operations manager position, we brought in Mark, a former nonprofit director who had a knack for streamlining processes and maximizing efficiency. Mark quickly became the backbone of our administrative efforts, freeing up Grace to focus on community outreach and donor relations. The changes didn't happen overnight, and there were plenty of bumps along the way. Adjusting to the new structure required patience and communication, and I had to learn to let go of tasks I had previously handled myself. But as the weeks went by, I began to see the benefits. Meetings ran more smoothly, deadlines were met with less stress, and the team seemed more energized and cohesive. One of the most significant shifts was the way Emily and Laura worked together. Their collaboration brought fresh ideas to our programs, including a new initiative focused on workplace mental health. They developed a series of workshops designed to help employers create supportive environments for their employees, addressing issues like burnout, stress management, and communication. The initiative quickly gained traction, with local businesses reaching out to partner with us. Watching the team thrive under the new structure was a revelation. I realized that leadership wasn't about being at the center of everything, it was about creating an environment where everyone could contribute their strengths. By stepping back, I was allowing the foundation to grow beyond my own limitations. One evening, as I walked through the garden, I reflected on how far we had come. The flowers were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a reminder of the care and patience it had taken to nurture them. In many ways, the foundation felt like that garden, a living, growing entity that required attention and trust to flourish. My father, who had been quietly observing the changes, offered his own perspective. You've grown a lot, Maddie, he said as we sat on the porch. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about guiding others, helping them find their strengths, and building something that can stand on its own. You're doing that, and I couldn't be prouder. His words filled me with a sense of pride and gratitude. The foundation was no longer just my mother's dream or my project, it was a collective effort, a reflection of the team's shared vision and dedication. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a deep sense of peace. The changes we had made weren't just about improving operations, they were about creating a sustainable future for the foundation. And in the process, I had learned one of the most valuable lessons of all, that true leadership isn't about control, it's about collaboration, trust, and the courage to adapt. Just as we were beginning to settle into the new leadership structure, another storm brewed on the horizon, one I hadn't seen coming. It began with a call from Mark, our operations manager, who had been conducting a routine audit of our donor partnerships and financial records. "Can we meet?" he asked, his voice cautious. "There's something you need to see." I agreed immediately, my stomach twisting into knots. Mark's thoroughness had already saved us time and effort on several occasions, but his tone suggested this was something far more serious. When I arrived at the office, Mark was waiting with a file spread open on the desk. He motioned for me to sit, his expression grave. "I noticed some unusual activity in our donor records," he began. "One of our larger contributors, a corporate sponsor, has been tied to financial misconduct. And it gets worse, they were working with Michael." The room seemed to tilt. I hadn't thought about Michael Wright since his resignation, focusing instead on repairing the damage he had caused. But now his betrayal felt fresh again, the sting of his actions reopening old wounds. "What kind of misconduct?" I asked, bracing myself. Mark explained that the donor company, a seemingly reputable entity, had been funneling money into unauthorized accounts through intermediaries, including Michael during his time with us. While our foundation hadn't knowingly been part of the scheme, some of the donations we had received were likely tainted by their illicit activities. The weight of the revelation hit me like a freight train. Not only did this threaten the reputation we had worked so hard to rebuild, but it also jeopardized the trust of our community and supporters. I felt the familiar churn of frustration and fear rising within me. How could this happen again? But instead of dwelling on the unfairness of the situation, I knew we had to act quickly. "What are our options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Mark outlined a plan. First, we needed to sever ties with the donor immediately. Then, we would conduct a full internal review to ensure our own records were clean and transparent. Finally, we would need to issue a public statement addressing the situation. I called an emergency meeting with the team that evening. As I shared the news, I saw the same mix of shock and frustration reflected in their faces. "We've been through this before," I said, trying to rally them. "And we came out stronger. This time won't be any different. The key is to stay transparent and proactive." Emily, ever the optimist, spoke up. "If we're honest about this and show people that we're taking it seriously, they'll respect that. We can't control what others do, but we can control how we respond." Her words became our guiding principle over the next few weeks. The first step was severing ties with the donor, a decision that was both straightforward and fraught with complications. While we knew it was the right thing to do, it meant losing a significant source of funding at a time when we were expanding our programs. The financial strain was immediate, but I refused to compromise the integrity of the foundation. Next came the internal review. Mark worked tirelessly to audit every aspect of our financial operations, double-checking records and ensuring that no other irregularities had gone unnoticed. Grace and Sarah helped compile the information into a report that we planned to share with our board and key stakeholders. Meanwhile, I drafted a public statement with Sarah's guidance. The words didn't come easily. It's never simple to admit that your organization has been tied to something unethical, even indirectly, but I knew that honesty was the only path forward. In the statement, we outlined what had happened, explained our response, and reaffirmed our commitment to transparency and accountability. We also announced new measures to strengthen our partnerships with donors, including more rigorous vetting processes and regular reviews. When the statement was published, I braced myself for the backlash, but to my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Emails and messages poured in from community members, donors, and even other non-profit leaders, praising our integrity and offering encouragement. "I can't imagine how difficult this must be," one donor wrote. "But your honesty speaks volumes about your character. I'm proud to continue supporting your mission." Another message from a participant in one of our programs read, "This doesn't change the fact that your foundation has made a difference in my life. Thank you for staying true to your values." The outpouring of support was humbling, but it also reinforced the responsibility we carried. People believed in us, not because we were perfect but because we were committed to doing the right thing even when it was hard. As the dust began to settle, I reflected on what we had learned from the crisis. It had been another painful reminder that leadership meant facing challenges head-on, even when they felt insurmountable. It also reaffirmed the importance of building an organization rooted in integrity, one that could weather storms without losing sight of its mission. One evening, as I walked through the ranch, I found myself drawn to the garden. The flowers were beginning to fade, their vibrant blooms giving way to the muted tones of late autumn. Yet even in their fading, there was beauty, a reminder that growth isn't always linear, that setbacks and seasons of change are part of the process. Standing there, I thought about my mother and the dream that had started it all. Her vision had carried me through moments of doubt and fear, guiding me like a compass. And though the road had been far from easy, I knew that we were building something lasting, something that could withstand even the fiercest storms. The foundation had survived another crisis, and we were stronger for it. As I looked out over the horizon, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, but we were ready for whatever came next. Together, we would keep moving forward, one step, one lesson, and one act of courage at a time. The foundation's recovery from the donor crisis was hard-fought but ultimately transformative. The challenges had tested our limits, but they had also redefined our strength. The lessons we had learned about transparency, resilience, and the importance of community were woven into the very fabric of the organization. We emerged from the ordeal not just intact but invigorated, ready to embrace the next chapter of our journey. One of the first steps forward was celebrating the achievements we had fought so hard to protect. We hosted a community event at the ranch, a chance to reconnect with the people who had supported us through thick and thin. The day was filled with laughter and camaraderie, with booths showcasing our programs, testimonials from participants, and activities for families. It felt like a homecoming, a reminder of why we had started this journey in the first place. I stood on a small stage in the center of the event, looking out at the crowd. The faces before me were a mix of familiar and new donors, volunteers, participants, and community members who had become part of the foundation's story. As I held the microphone, a wave of emotion washed over me. This was no longer just my mother's dream or my mission, it was something much bigger, something shared. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. When this foundation began, it was inspired by my mother's dream, a dream of creating a place where women could find hope and support. Over the past year, that dream has grown into something far greater than I ever imagined. And it's all because of you. The crowd erupted into applause, their energy filling the space like sunlight breaking through clouds. I took a deep breath and continued, sharing stories of the lives we had touched and the impact of programs like Pathways to Wellness and Safe Circles. Each story was a testament to the power of connection, the importance of showing up for one another in moments of need. As I spoke, I felt my mother's presence, her quiet strength guiding me. She had dreamed of helping others, and now her dream was alive, growing in ways that honored her vision while carving its own path. The event was more than a celebration, it was also a springboard for our next initiatives. Thanks to the lessons learned from the crisis, we had developed new partnerships with ethical, like-minded organizations. These collaborations allowed us to expand our reach, bringing programs to underserved areas and offering more resources than ever before. One of our most ambitious projects was a mental health resource center, a physical space where women could access counseling, support groups, and educational workshops. It had been Emily's idea, and she spearheaded the effort with her characteristic passion and tenacity. Located in the heart of a neighboring town, the center became a beacon of hope for the community, offering services to hundreds of women in its first few months. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I felt a swell of pride as Emily stood beside me, her smile radiant. "This is just the beginning," she said, her eyes shining with determination. And she was right. The resource center wasn't just a milestone, it was a foundation for even greater impact. Meanwhile, the foundation's outreach programs continued to flourish. Laura and Sarah worked tirelessly to bring pathways to wellness to new audiences, partnering with schools, businesses, and community organizations. Their efforts paid off, with attendance at workshops doubling and feedback overwhelmingly positive. But perhaps the most rewarding moments came from the personal connections we built along the way. One evening, as I reviewed emails in the office, I came across a message from a woman named Lila, who had attended one of our support groups. Her words brought tears to my eyes. "I want to thank you and your team for everything you've done. When I came to the foundation, I was at my lowest point. I felt invisible, like no one understood what I was going through. But your programs gave me a voice, a community, and a reason to keep going. I'm stronger now, not just for myself but for my family. You've changed my life." Lila's message was a reminder of why we kept going. Even when the path felt impossibly hard, each life touched, each heart mended, was proof that our work mattered. As the foundation grew, so did my confidence as a leader. The challenges I had faced, the betrayals, the crises, the endless decisions had shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had learned to trust not only my team but also myself, to lean into uncertainty and find strength in vulnerability. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood in the garden, now vibrant with life. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors a testament to the care and patience they had been given. The garden, like the foundation, had grown from something fragile into something resilient and beautiful. My father joined me, his presence steady and comforting. "You've built something incredible, Maddie," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And without her." He nodded, his gaze soft. "She's always with you, in everything you do." As the stars began to twinkle above us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The foundation was no longer just a tribute to my mother, it was a living, breathing force for good, a testament to the power of hope, love, and resilience. The journey wasn't over, it never would be. There were still challenges to face, lives to touch, and lessons to learn. But for the first time, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The foundation, like the garden, would continue to grow, nurtured by the dreams of those who came before and the courage of those who believed in what it could become. And in that moment, under the vast Wyoming sky, I knew we were only just beginning. As the journey unfolded, the foundation became more than just a dream, it transformed into a beacon of hope for countless women, a testament to resilience, and a legacy of love. The challenges faced along the way had tested everyone involved, but through perseverance, trust, and an unwavering commitment to the mission, the foundation stood stronger than ever. Madison, once lost in a world of superficiality, found her purpose and became a leader who inspired others with her courage and empathy. Her mother's dream not only gave her life new meaning but also created a ripple effect of change in the lives of so many others. Standing under the Wyoming sky, Madison reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The ranch, once a place of exile, had become a sanctuary, a place where dreams were planted and grew into something extraordinary. She smiled, knowing that the work was far from over but confident that the foundation would continue to thrive and touch lives for generations to come. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of courage, transformation, and hope. See you in the next story.